Just another piece of trash for the pile. The officer's voice was flat, bored, a practiced contempt. He nudged the shattered graphite and titanium components of the prosthetic leg with the toe of his boot. Looks like you'll be hopping home. That was the first thing Elias Thorne noticed. Not the pain radiating from the stump of his left leg, not the grinding pressure of the handcuffs on his 62-year-old wrist, but the casual desecration. The officer Kovich had a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a performer's smirk, for the small audience of passing cars on the overpass and the two teenagers who had stopped filming their skate video to film this instead. Their phones were held up like small dark mirrors reflecting the ugly scene. Elias said nothing. He remained on the dusty ground where Kovich had thrown him, his back against the rough concrete of the bridge abutment. He kept his breathing steady. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Out for 6. The numbers were a small, solid thing to hold onto in the swirling chaos of humiliation and rising anger. He looked at the pieces of his leg, a marvel of engineering worth more than the patrol car humming beside them, and felt a coldness settle in his gut. It was a feeling he recognized from firefights decades ago. Not fear. Something colder. Resolve. What Officer Kovich didn't know, what no one on that bridge could possibly know, was that Master Sergeant, retired Elias Thorne, was a man who built things, and he was a man who understood, with an engineer's precision, exactly how to take them apart. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The day had begun with light, the kind of soft, early September light that filtered through the sycamore tree in the backyard and painted dappled patterns on the kitchen floor. It was 5:30 a.m. Elias was already up, as he had been every day for the last 45 years. The habit, forged in the unforgiving discipline of basic training, had never left him. He moved through the quiet house with a practiced economy of motion. The floorboards didn't creak. The cupboard doors closed with a soft click. He started the coffee, the smell of dark roast beans, a specific blend from a small shop downtown, filled the kitchen. It was a sensory anchor, the first note in the symphony of his morning ritual. While the coffee brewed, he sat at the small, sturdy oak desk in the corner of his study. On it, laid out on a piece of clean green felt, were his father's drafting tools. A German-made compass, a set of ruling pens, a well-worn triangular architect's scale. They were heavy, solid objects from an era before computer-aided design. Elias had learned to draw with them, his father's large, gentle hand guiding his own. Now, he simply cleaned them. Every morning, he'd wipe down the cool steel with a soft cloth, feeling the heft and the history in his palm. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about connection. A connection to the man who taught him that a well-drawn line was a promise, and that the integrity of a structure began long before the first piece of steel was set. His wife, Anya, came into the kitchen as he was pouring his first cup. She moved with the same quiet grace he did, a registered nurse who understood the sanctity of a sleeping house. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Good morning, Sergeant," she murmured into his neck. "Good morning, ma'am," he replied, his voice a low rumble. They stood like that for a full minute, a comfortable practiced silence. It was a silence built over 35 years of shared mornings, of crises weathered and joys celebrated. It was its own language. She took her coffee and they sat at the kitchen table, the rising sun now casting longer, sharper shadows. "Big day?" she asked. "Just a final site inspection for the Elm Street Bridge retrofit. Need to sign off on the pre-stressing report before they pour the deck next week." He spoke with a quiet authority, the language of his profession. After retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers, he'd taken a position as a senior civil engineer with the city. He didn't need the work, not really. His pension was more than enough. But he needed the purpose. Building things, strengthening things. It was who he was. "Don't let those city boys rush you," Anya said. It was a familiar refrain. "They won't." He smiled. "I'll be home for lunch." He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it in the dishwasher. The whole routine, from waking to this moment, had taken exactly 45 minutes. Precise, methodical. He went to the bedroom to get dressed. He chose his work clothes, sturdy denim jeans, a navy blue polo shirt with a small, discreet city engineering department logo on the breast, and steel-toed work boots. Then came the final, most crucial part of his morning. He sat on the edge of the bed and began the process of attaching his leg. The prosthetic was a C-Leg 4, a microprocessor-controlled knee that cost upwards of $50,000. It was a masterpiece of technology, with gyroscopes, angle sensors, and a complex algorithm that anticipated his movements, making for a remarkably natural gait. He'd lost his own leg just below the knee to an IED outside of Kandahar, an event he rarely spoke of, but which was a constant, silent presence in his life. The process of attaching the prosthesis was intimate and routine. He rolled on the gel liner, checked the suction valve, and then guided the stump of his limb into the custom-molded carbon fiber socket. A series of clicks confirmed the connection. He stood, testing the weight. He took a few steps around the bedroom, feeling the silent hum of the microprocessors. It was as much a part of him as his own hand, a symbol not of loss, but of adaptation, of resilience. He had 21 days of vacation leave scheduled to begin next week, a driving trip with Anya up the coast, and he was looking forward to it with a quiet, deep-seated joy, the kind of joy that only comes after decades of hard work. He kissed Anya goodbye at the door. "See you at noon," he said. "Be safe," she replied, her hand briefly on his cheek. The drive to the bridge was pleasant. The late summer air was warm, and he drove his 10-year-old Ford F-15O with the windows down. He didn't listen to the radio, just the road and the engine and the morning air. He passed through neighborhoods he had helped design, past storm drains he had personally inspected, over roads whose substrate composition he knew by heart. He saw the city not as a collection of buildings and people, but as a living system, a complex structure of concrete, steel, and human endeavor, and he was one of its caretakers. The Elm Street Bridge was a modest, three-span concrete structure built in the 1960s. It crossed a shallow, tree-lined ravine that separated a quiet residential neighborhood from a small industrial park. His job was to oversee its seismic retrofitting. He parked his truck in the designated staging area on the north side of the ravine, a gravel lot owned by the city. He grabbed his hard hat, a reflective vest, and his clipboard from the passenger seat. The report he needed to review was clipped to it, filled with technical data and tensioning logs. His own property, a small, undeveloped parcel of land he'd bought years ago as an investment, bordered this staging area. He often used the access from his property to get a better vantage point of the bridge's underside. He walked from the gravel lot, under the steel chain separating it from his land, and began making his way down the gentle, grassy slope toward the first abutment. The ground was a little uneven, covered in dry leaves and small twigs. He moved with a steady, deliberate pace, his sea leg automatically adjusting to the terrain. He could feel the slight vibration through the socket, the tiny computer making 100 calculations a second. He stopped about 50 feet from the massive concrete support in the dapple shade of a large oak. From here, he could see the new carbon fiber wraps around the columns and the anchor points for the external post-tensioning cables. Everything looked clean, orderly. He made a note on his clipboard. The sun was warm on his back. It was a good day to be outside, a good day to be building something that would keep people safe. He had no idea that his meticulously ordered world was about to be shattered. He didn't see the police cruiser slow down on the overpass above or the officer inside watching him with a predatory stillness. He just heard the crunch of gravel as the car pulled off the road and onto the shoulder, followed by the slam of a car door. The quiet of the morning was over. A voice, amplified and distorted by a megaphone, boomed across the ravine. "You down there, put your hands where I can see them." Elias Thorne looked up from his clipboard. He blinked against the bright sun glinting off the cruiser's windshield. He saw the silhouette of an officer standing by the guardrail, one hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. Elias felt a familiar, weary tightening in his chest. He had learned a long time ago that the uniform he wore for 30 years in service to his country meant nothing to some men. To them, his skin was the only uniform that mattered. Slow and deliberate, he placed the clipboard on the ground beside him. He raised his hands to shoulder height, palms open, a gesture of compliance, a gesture he hated. "I'm a city engineer," he called out, his voice calm and even. He didn't shout. He never raised his voice during a confrontation. "I'm conducting a site inspection." "Get up here," the voice commanded. "Now." Elias sighed, a small, almost inaudible exhalation of breath. This was a waste of time. He had work to do. He began the slow walk up the grassy slope. The incline was about 20 degrees, manageable but requiring concentration. Each step with his prosthetic had to be deliberate. Plant, lock, push. The sea legs motor whirred softly, assisting with the climb. The officer was waiting for him at the top, by the broken chain-link fence that separated the public road from the city lot and his adjacent property. The officer was a man in his late 30s, with a thick neck and pale, restless eyes. The name tag on his uniform read Kovic. He had the kind of performative authority that Elias had seen in countless young lieutenants who mistook volume for command. Kovic's hand was still on his holster. That was the second thing Elias noticed. A man who touches his weapon before he speaks is a man who is looking for a reason to use it. "What are you doing down there?" Kovic asked. His tone was accusatory, as if he'd already decided the answer. "As I said, I'm a city engineer," Elias repeated patiently. "I'm inspecting the seismic retrofit on this bridge. My name is Elias Thorne." He gestured with his chin toward his truck, clearly visible in the designated lot. "My vehicle is right there. The city permit is on the dashboard." Kovic's eyes flickered toward the truck, then back to Elias. He didn't seem to register the information. His gaze was fixed on Elias's face, searching for something. Defiance, maybe. Fear. He would find neither. "I didn't ask for your life story," Kovic snapped. "I asked what you were doing. This is a known vagrant encampment. We've had complaints." Elias looked around at the clean, empty ravine. There was no trash, no tents, no sign of any encampment. The grass was trimmed. "Officer," he said, his voice dropping a register, becoming even quieter, more precise. "The land I was standing on belongs to me. This lot here belongs to the city. I have authorization to be on both. If you'll allow me to walk to my truck, I can show you my city identification and the site permit." Kovic took a step closer, crowding Elias's space. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Make the other person feel small. Make them step back. Elias didn't move. He stood his ground, his weight balanced perfectly. He could smell the cheap, minty chewing gum on the officer's breath. "I'll be the one who decides what you're allowed to do," Kovic said, his voice low and menacing. "Let me see your ID." "It's in my wallet, in my back pocket," Elias said. "I'm going to reach for it now. Slowly." He made the movement slow and telegraphed, just as he'd been taught in countless de-escalation trainings. But Kovic was not interested in de-escalation. As Elias's hand moved toward his back pocket, Kovic lunged. He grabbed Elias's arm, twisting it violently behind his back. "Don't you move!" Kovic shouted, his voice suddenly loud again for the benefit of any onlookers. The sudden, violent torque threw Elias off balance. His sea leg, for all its technological sophistication, was not designed for that kind of lateral shearing force. It tried to adjust, its internal gyroscope spinning, but the angle was too acute. His ankle buckled. He felt a sickening crack, not of bone, but of carbon fiber and steel. The leg gave way completely. He fell hard onto the dusty gravel at the edge of the road. The impact sent a shock wave of pain through his residual limb, a hot, searing agony that made his vision swim. He landed on his side, his arm still wrenched behind him. Kovic put a knee in his back, grinding his face into the dirt. "Stop resisting!" Kovic yelled, though Elias was doing nothing of the sort. He was simply trying to breathe through the fire in his leg. From the ground, his cheek pressed against the sharp stones, Elias could see the two teenagers. They had moved closer. Their phones were still up, still recording. He saw the shock on their young faces. He also saw Officer Kovic's partner, a younger, nervous-looking officer, get out of the passenger side of the cruiser. The partner looked hesitant, his eyes wide. He said something to Kovic that Elias couldn't hear. Kovic ignored him. He cinched a zip-tie handcuff around Elias's wrist, pulling it so tight it cut into his skin. Then he stood up, breathing heavily, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He looked down at Elias, not with the concern of an officer who had just injured a citizen, but with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. And then he did it. He walked over to the now useless prosthetic leg, which had detached from the socket during the fall, and lay mangled on the ground. He looked at it, then back at Elias. "Just another piece of trash for the pile," Kovic said. He nudged the delicate, expensive machinery with his boot. Looks like you'll be hopping home. The partner flinched. He looked away, toward the bridge, as if he could pretend this wasn't happening. In that moment, lying in the dirt, humiliated and in excruciating pain, Elias Thorne let himself feel the rage. He gave it exactly 10 seconds. He felt the heat flood his chest, the primal urge to scream, to fight back, to destroy this man who had so casually destroyed a part of him. He let the feeling crest, a white-hot wave, and then, with the same discipline he used to clean his father's tools, he let it go. He packed it away in a cold, dark corner of his mind. Rage was a fire that consumed the person who held it. It was inefficient. What he needed now was not fire. He needed steel. He needed a blueprint. The engineer in him took over. He began to assess the damage, to calculate the forces, to plan the reconstruction. Not of the bridge, of justice. The ride to the precinct was a study in practiced degradation. Kovich and his silent partner, a young officer named Evans, didn't speak to him. They didn't speak to each other. The silence in the car was thick with what had just happened. Elias was crammed in the back, his 6-foot 2-inch frame contorted to fit. The edge of the plastic seat dug into his thigh. Without his prosthetic, his body was unbalanced, and every turn and stop sent a jolt of pain through his hip and lower back. The raw stump of his leg throbbed with a deep, insistent ache. The zip-tie cuffs were a band of fire around his wrist. He focused on his breathing. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds hold. 6 seconds out. He cataloged every sensation. The smell of stale air freshener. The crackle of the police radio. The sight of the city he knew so well passing by outside the cage. It looked different from this angle. Alien. Hostile. At the station, Kovich hauled him out of the car with unnecessary force. He stumbled. Catching himself on the doorframe, Kovich shoved him forward. "Move it," he grunted. The booking area was a drab, institutional beige, lit by the unforgiving hum of fluorescent lights. It smelled of disinfectant and despair. Kovich pushed him toward the desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with a face like a worn-out catcher's mitt. "Got a live one," Kovich announced to the room. "Assault on an officer, resisting arrest, trespassing." The desk sergeant looked at Elias, then at the paperwork Kovich slapped on the counter. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem anything. This was just another Tuesday. "Name?" The sergeant grunted, not looking at him. "Elias Thorne." His voice was steady. He would not give them the satisfaction of hearing him tremble. The process was designed to strip a person of their identity, piece by piece. They took his wallet, his keys, his watch. They took his belt and the laces from his remaining boot. Each item removed was another layer of his life, his dignity, peeled away. When they asked him to stand for a mugshot, he had to lean against the wall to keep his balance. The flash of the camera was a small, bright explosion in the dim room. He was placed in a holding cell. The door clanged shut with the sound of absolute finality. The cell was cold concrete and steel. A single metal bench was bolted to the wall. He lowered himself onto it carefully, his body screaming in protest. The pain in his leg was no longer a sharp fire. It was a deep, grinding sea of agony. He looked at the stump. The liner still on, now smeared with dirt. He thought of his sea leg, lying broken in the gravel. A $50,000 piece of advanced medical equipment dismissed as trash. He allowed himself a moment. He closed his eyes and let the weight of the humiliation wash over him. The physical pain was one thing. He knew pain. He had lived with it for more than a decade. This was different. This was a violation of a deeper kind. It was the casual erasure of his humanity, the assumption that a 62-year-old black man in work clothes must be a criminal. The smug satisfaction in Kovich's eyes. He let himself feel it for exactly 90 seconds. He counted them off in his head. Then he was done. The feeling was processed, categorized, and filed away. It was now data, an input for the equation he was beginning to solve in his mind. He had one phone call. He knew the number by heart. Anya answered on the second ring. "Elias, is everything okay? It's past noon." "Anya," he said, and his voice was so calm, so devoid of the turmoil inside him, that it surprised even himself. "I'm at the downtown precinct. I've been arrested." The silence on the other end of the line lasted about 3 seconds. When she spoke, her voice was the one she used in the emergency room. No panic. Pure, focused competence. "Okay, What are the charges? Assaulting an officer, resisting arrest. He didn't add the trespassing. It was too absurd. Are you hurt? Yes. He paused. The officer, he broke my leg. Another silence. This one was different. He could feel her absorbing the information, the horror of it, and then pushing it aside to deal with the immediate problem. She was a professional. She was his wife. Okay, Elias, I'm on my way. I'll call a lawyer. Don't say another word to anyone. Do you understand? I understand. I love you. I love you too. He hung up the phone. The simple act of speaking to her, of hearing her strength, was like a splint on his fractured spirit. He was not alone in this concrete box. Hours passed. The light in the hallway outside his cell changed. The sounds of the precinct shifted from the daytime bustle to the more sporadic, tense noises of the evening shift. He did not sleep. He sat on the bench, his back straight, and he thought. He replayed the entire incident in his mind, not as a victim, but as an engineer. He analyzed the sequence of events, the words used, the body language. He noted Kovic's immediate escalation, his partner's hesitation, the presence of the two young witnesses with their phones. He built a schematic of the event in his head, a blueprint of injustice. It was close to midnight when the cell door finally opened. A young, tired-looking public defender stood there. Anya was behind him, her face a mask of controlled worry. The sight of her was like a gulp of clean air. Mr. Thorne, I'm Ben Carter. Your wife retained me. I've posted your bail. The process of being released was the reverse of being booked, but no less dehumanizing. His property was returned in a plastic bag. He signed a form. No one made eye contact. When he stepped out into the humid night air, the city lights seemed harsh and alien. Anya was there. She didn't rush to him. She just stood there, her presence a solid, unwavering anchor. He limped toward her, his body aching. She put an arm around his waist, taking on his weight. Let's go home, she said softly. The drive home was silent. When they walked in the door, the house felt different. It was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a command center. Anya had already been at work. A large envelope from a bail bondsman was on the kitchen table. Next to it was a legal pad with a list of names and numbers. In the center of the table, she had placed his father's drafting tools, cleaned and arranged just as he always left them. It was a message. It meant, we are still who we are. This does not change us. He sat down heavily at the table. Anya knelt in front of him and gently, expertly, examined the stump of his leg. The skin was bruised and swollen. We need to get you to a doctor, she said, her voice tight with the fury she would not let him see. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight I need to think. She nodded. She understood. She went to the kitchen and started making him something to eat. A simple omelet. The familiar sounds of her cooking, the smell of butter in a hot pan, began to push back against the sterile coldness of the jail cell. He looked at the paperwork, the formal charges, the court date set for 3 weeks from now, his vacation, the trip up the coast he and Anya had been planning for months, 21 days of leave he had been saving up. A countdown started in his head. 21 days. He picked up his compass, the one his father had used to design his first building. The cold steel felt good in his hand. Solid. Precise. He had 21 days. It was time to get to work. The next morning, the full scope of the damage became clear. Dr. Evans, his prosthetist for the last 10 years, looked at the mangled heap of graphite, titanium, and electronics on his examination table with a grim expression. Elias, what in God's name happened? Elias told him. The whole story, in flat declarative sentences. He left out the emotion. He just stated the facts. Dr. Evans listened, his frown deepening. He kicked it? The doctor asked, his voice full of disbelief. He nudged it with his boot after it was already broken, Elias clarified. The distinction was important. It spoke to intent. Dr. Evans picked up the main chassis of the sea leg. A large crack ran through the carbon fiber housing. The primary hydraulic cylinder was bent at an unnatural angle. The microprocessor is shot. The knee joint is completely destroyed. Elias, this is a total loss. Elias had known, but hearing it confirmed landed like a physical blow. What's the replacement cost? To rebuild this exact model, you're looking at close to $60,000, and the wait time for the components can be months. $60,000, the price of a luxury car, the price of a year of college, the price of the casual contempt of a single police officer. Elias felt a wave of cold fury, but his face remained impassive. My insurance? We can file, but they'll fight it. They'll say it wasn't a medical failure. It was damage from an altercation. They'll want the police report. The police report. Elias knew what that would say. It would be a work of fiction, designed to protect the man who had caused this. The machine was already working to protect its own. Okay, Elias said. Start the process. I'll handle the rest. He left the doctor's office with a standard, non-articulating loner leg. It was heavy, clumsy, a peg leg, essentially. Every step was a jarring reminder of what he had lost. The smooth, intuitive grace of his sea leg was gone, replaced by a crude, functional stump. Walking was now a conscious, laborious effort. The humiliation of it was a constant, dull ache. That afternoon, the official police report was released. Anya printed it from the city's public portal. They sat at the kitchen table and read it together. It was worse than he could have imagined. Officer Dale Kovich's sworn statement painted a picture of a heroic officer confronting a belligerent, potentially dangerous suspect. It claimed Elias had been acting erratically and matched the description of a suspect in a series of local thefts. It stated that Elias had refused to show identification and had then taken a combative stance. The report alleged that Elias had shoved Officer Kovich, initiating the physical confrontation. The fall, it claimed, was a result of Elias tripping over his own feet while trying to flee. The damage to the prosthetic was described as pre-existing, or having occurred during the fall he caused himself. It was a complete systematic fabrication. There was no mention of Elias identifying himself as a city engineer. No mention of his offer to retrieve his ID. No mention of Kovich's partner, Evans. It was Kovich's word, sealed with the authority of the badge. They're lying, Anya said, her voice shaking with a quiet rage. Every single word of this is a lie. Of course it is, Elias said calmly. He tapped the paper. This isn't a report. It's an alibi. It's the first gear in the machine. He had learned a long time ago that the system was not designed to find the truth. It was designed to protect itself. His initial complaint, filed by his lawyer that morning, would be investigated by Kovich's own colleagues. It would be reviewed by Kovich's own supervisors. It would be dismissed. He knew this with absolute certainty. He felt the walls of the machine closing in. The false report, the astronomical cost of his leg, the looming court date where he was the defendant. The weight of it was immense. It was designed to be immense. It was designed to crush people, to make them give up, to make them accept the plea deal, pay the fine, and disappear. He stood up and walked, his new, clumsy gait loud on the hardwood floors, to the window overlooking his backyard. He watched a blue jay land on the bird feeder. He felt the despair trying to find a crack to seep into. He let himself feel it for exactly 60 seconds. Then he turned back to Anya. They think I'm going to break, he said. They think I'm going to get tired and go away. You won't, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. I won't. A new resolve settled over him, hard and clear as quartz. This was no longer just about his leg or his name. It was about the machine itself. He had spent his life building things to withstand pressure. Now he would become the pressure. Anya, he said, there's someone I need to go see. An hour later, he was parking his truck on a quiet, tree-lined street in the city's oldest black neighborhood. The houses were modest but well kept, with neat lawns and flower boxes. He walked down the block to a small, unassuming storefront with a faded, candy-striped pole out front. Henderson's House of Style, the sign read. It had been there for 50 years. Mr. James Henderson was 80 years old, with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes that had seen everything. He was sitting in his favorite barber chair, reading the newspaper. He looked up as Elias entered, the small bell over the door announcing his arrival. Elias Thorne, Mr. Henderson said, his voice a warm, gravelly baritone. It's been too long. He folded his newspaper. His eyes fell to Elias's loner leg, the clumsy, awkward way he moved. I heard what happened. The wind carries ugly news fast in this town. Elias nodded. He didn't need to ask how he knew. In this community, news traveled not on the wind, but through a network of phone calls, church groups, and quiet conversations over fences. It was a system of its own, built for survival. "I need your help, Mr. Henderson," Elias said. The old barber nodded slowly. He got up from his chair and walked to the back of the shop, disappearing behind a beaded curtain. Elias could hear the sounds of unlocking, of a heavy lid being lifted. He returned a moment later carrying a large, worn cardboard box, the kind used for storing files. It was bound with twine. He placed it on the empty barber chair next to Elias. "I've been the unofficial historian of this neighborhood for a long time, son," Mr. Henderson said. "People talk to their barber. They tell you things they won't tell a preacher or a cop, and I listen, and I write it down." He patted the top of the box. "This here is the Dale Kovich file, and the files of the men who trained him. And the men who trained them. It goes back a ways." Elias looked at the box. It was unassuming, but he could feel the weight of it. The weight of years of quiet injustices, of undocumented abuses, of casual cruelties. "Every time that boy Kovich roughed someone up, mister," Henderson continued. "Every time he used a slur, every time a complaint got lost at the precinct, someone told me. I had them write it down, sign it, date it. Notarized statements, some of them, photos, little things, big things, a pattern." He looked Elias directly in the eye. "I've been waiting for the right person to give this to. Someone with the discipline to use it right. Someone they won't be able to dismiss. Someone they will underestimate." Elias felt a profound sense of gravity settle over him. This was not just a box of old papers. This was the work of an elder. It was a weapon, patiently forged over decades. It was the foundation of his case. "The machine that protects him," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It has gears. It has weaknesses. You're an engineer, Elias. You know that every structure has a breaking point. You just have to find it." Elias placed his hand on the box. He felt the history, the pain, the hope contained within it. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," he said. The words felt inadequate. "Don't thank me," the old man said, a flicker of something fierce in his ancient eyes. "Just make it count." As Elias carried the box back to his truck, the weight of it felt different. It was no longer the weight of history. It was the weight of ammunition. He had 19 days of leave remaining. The countdown continued, but now he had a plan. He had a blueprint. That night, the kitchen table was transformed. It was no longer a place for meals, but a war room. Elias and Anya opened Mr. Henderson's box. The contents were meticulously organized. Dozens of manila folders, each labeled with a name and a date. Inside were handwritten statements, typed affidavits, faded photographs of bruises and damaged property. It was a library of sorrow, a testament to decades of unchecked power. They read for hours, the silence in the room broken only by the rustle of paper. They read the story of a young man pulled over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken and who ended up with a dislocated shoulder. They read the story of a shopkeeper whose store was illegally searched by Kovich, who claimed to smell something he couldn't have. They read a dozen different stories that all followed the same pattern: a minor or non-existent infraction, an immediate escalation by Kovich, a violent overreaction, and then a police report that painted the victim as the aggressor. In almost every case, the victim was black or Latino, and in every case, the internal affairs complaint was dismissed as unfounded. The name of Kovich's supervising officer appeared again and again on the dismissal forms: Sergeant, then Lieutenant, then Chief Robert Miller. "Miller," Anya said, her voice tight. "He was Kovich's first partner on the force. They came up together." Elias nodded slowly. "The protector, the next level of the machine." He felt the cold calculus of the system solidifying in his mind. The front-line aggressor, Kovich, was shielded by the mid-level protector, Miller. And Miller, in turn, was protected by the inertia of the entire institution, an institution the mayor, who relied on the police union's endorsement, had no interest in upsetting. It was a fortress, but a fortress could be breached. The next day, Elias fired the public defender. He took a substantial amount from his savings and retained Jessica Riley. She was a partner at a small but fearsome civil rights firm in the state capital, a woman with a reputation for taking on impossible cases and winning. She was sharp, direct, and had eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. They met in her sparse, modern office. Elias brought his own file, the fraudulent police report, Dr. Evans' assessment of his prosthetic, his own meticulously written account of the incident, and a single heavy folder from Mr. Henderson's box, the one with the most thoroughly documented notarized complaints against Kovich. Riley read through his materials in silence, her expression unreadable. She spent 20 minutes on his personal statement alone, reading it twice. When she was done, she leaned back in her chair and looked at him. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of pity, "they are going to try to paint you as an angry, unstable man. They will bring up your military service, but not to praise it. They will try to imply you have PTSD. They will use your discipline and composure against you. Call it cold and unfeeling. They are going to put your entire life on trial to justify what that officer did in 5 minutes." "I am aware of that," Elias said. "Good," she replied, a flicker of respect in her eyes, "because we are going to do the same to them." She tapped the folder from Mr. Henderson's box. "This is a start. A pattern of behavior is powerful, but it's historical. What we need is something current, something undeniable." "The witnesses," Elias said. "There were 2 teenagers filming. Did you get their names?" "No. It all happened too fast." Riley's face fell slightly. "Finding them will be like finding a needle in a haystack. Social media is a flood. It might be impossible. It was a setback, a significant one. Without that video, it was his word, the word of a black man and a supposed assailant, against the sworn testimony of a police officer." Elias felt a familiar pang of frustration, the feeling of a crucial component being out of reach. He went home that evening, feeling the weight of the fight ahead. That night, as he was methodically cleaning his father's tools, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it. "Hello? Is this Mr. Elias Thorne?" The voice was young, nervous. "It is. Who is this?" "My name is Leo. Leo Martinez. I was at the bridge the other day with my friend. We were filming." Elias's heart hammered in his chest. He kept his voice perfectly even. "Yes, I remember you. Look, man, I saw what he did. It was messed up, totally messed up, and we got it all on video." There was a pause. "The thing is, my mom, she's scared. She doesn't want me getting involved. The cops, you know." Elias knew. He knew the fear that was woven into the fabric of so many communities when it came to the police. The fear of retaliation, of being targeted. "I understand, Leo," Elias said, his voice gentle. "I would never ask you to put yourself or your family at risk." "But it's not right," the boy said, his voice gaining a sliver of conviction. "My grandfather, he always says, you see something wrong, you can't just look away. It makes you part of the wrong." Elias recognized the sentiment. It was the same moral foundation his own father had given him. "Your grandfather is a wise man." Another pause. "I saw on the news they charged you." "They're lying, mister." "Thorne. I have the proof. I haven't posted it. I haven't shown anyone. I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing by calling me," Elias said. "Would you be willing to meet with me and my lawyer, just to talk? No pressure." "Yeah," Leo said, the relief in his voice palpable. "Yeah, I can do that." They met the next day in a quiet corner of the public library. Leo was a skinny kid, no older than 16, with large, earnest eyes. He was clutching his phone like a holy relic. Jessica Riley was there, her presence calm and reassuring. Leo played the video. It was filmed on a high-quality phone camera, the image sharp and stable. It began with Elias on the ground, making his notes. It captured Kovich's shouted commands from the overpass. It showed Elias's slow, compliant walk up the hill. It recorded every word of their conversation. Elias's calm identification of himself, Kovich's aggressive dismissal. And then it captured the moment, the violent, unprovoked shove, the sickening crack of the prosthetic, the fall, Kovich's knee in Elias's back, the triumphant look on his face, and the final, damning act. Kovich walking over to the broken leg and nudging it with his boot, his voice, though faint, clearly audible. "Looks like you'll be hopping home." When the video ended, the silence in the library was profound. Jessica Riley let out a long, slow breath. She looked at Leo, then at Elias. A slow smile spread across her face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted a fatal weakness in its prey. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the whole case." She turned to Leo. "Leo, you have no idea what you've done. You're a hero." The boy blushed, looking down at his worn sneakers. "Now," Riley continued, her voice all business, "we need to protect this, and we need to protect you." She explained the legal process of submitting evidence, of protective orders. She assured him and his mother, who had come with him, that his identity would be shielded until the moment it was absolutely necessary. Leo and his mother agreed. They trusted Elias. They trusted the quiet dignity he projected. That afternoon, Riley filed a new motion, a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Dale Kovich, Chief Robert Miller, and the city. The complaint cited excessive force, malicious prosecution, and a pattern of racially discriminatory policing. And it mentioned, with deliberate vagueness, the existence of irrefutable video and documentary evidence. The machine had been engaged, but now it was on Elias Thorne's terms. He had 15 days of leave remaining. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. The filing of the federal lawsuit sent a shockwave through the city's political and legal establishment. It was no longer a simple local matter of an assault charge that could be quietly plea bargained away. It was now under the scrutiny of the U.S. District Court. The words civil rights violation and pattern of practice were suddenly appearing in headlines in the local paper. Mayor Thompson, who had initially issued a terse no comment, was forced to hold a press conference where he pledged a full and transparent investigation while simultaneously praising the police department's difficult and dangerous work. It was a dance Elias had seen many times before. Chief Robert Miller held his own press conference. He stood at a podium, flanked by the police union president, his face a mask of grim resolve. He defended Officer Kovich as a proactive and dedicated officer, and dismissed the lawsuit as a frivolous and cynical attempt to extort money from the city's taxpayers. He spoke of a war on cops and asked the public not to rush to judgment. Behind the scenes, however, a different kind of activity was taking place. The city's lawyers were in a panic. Jessica Riley's reputation preceded her, and the mention of irrefutable video evidence was a ticking time bomb. They sent a junior attorney to Riley's office with a lowball settlement offer, a check that would cover the cost of Elias's prosthetic and a little more in exchange for a full dismissal of the suit and a signed non-disclosure agreement. Riley didn't even let the young lawyer sit down. She took the offer sheet, glanced at it, and slid it back across her desk. "Tell your bosses that Mr. Thorne is not interested in being paid for his silence," she said, her voice like ice. "This is not about money. This is about accountability. We will see you in court." The rejection of the settlement offer was a declaration of war. The city's lawyers hunkered down, preparing to fight. They subpoenaed Elias's military service records, his medical history, his employment file. They were looking for anything they could use to tarnish him, to fit the narrative Kovich's report had created. Meanwhile, in a sterile records room in the basement of the police precinct, a young clerk named Maria Sanchez was following the case with a growing sense of unease. Maria had been in the records department for 2 years. She was quiet, efficient, and largely invisible. But she saw everything. She saw which reports were flagged for special handling. She saw which complaints disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She had personally filed away at least 3 separate complaints against Officer Kovich that had been routed directly to Chief Miller's office and had never been seen again. She had seen Elias Thorne's face on the news. He reminded her of her uncle, a man who worked hard his whole life and carried himself with a quiet pride. The story the department was telling didn't add up. She had seen Kovich in the hallways. She knew his swagger, the casual contempt he had for the public he was supposed to serve. The day after the federal suit was filed, Chief Miller himself came down to the records room. It was highly unusual. He asked Maria to pull Officer Kovich's complete personnel jacket, including the sealed internal affairs files. He took the thick folder into a private viewing room. Maria watched him through the small window in the door. She saw him go through the file, pulling out several documents. When he left the room, he handed her back a much thinner folder. "Refile this," he ordered without making eye contact. Maria knew, with a certainty that made her stomach clench, that he had just removed the most damning evidence from Kovich's file. He was actively sanitizing the record. He was tampering with evidence. It was a crime. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She thought of Elias Thorne. She thought of her uncle. She thought of Mr. Henderson, the barber, who had been a friend of her family for years and who always told her to keep your eyes open, Mija. The truth needs witnesses. The next day, she did something that terrified her. During her lunch break, she went into the record system. She knew that any documents officially removed from a file had to be logged out, even by the chief. Miller had been arrogant. He had followed the procedure, probably assuming no one would ever dare to check. She found the log. She saw the case numbers of the files he had pulled. And she knew that the system kept a digital backup of all scanned documents in a separate, deep archive server. It was a failsafe she wasn't even supposed to know about. One, an old-timer had shown her when she first started. Her hands were shaking. She looked around the empty office. With a few keystrokes, she accessed the deep archive. She found the files. 3 separate internal affairs investigations into Kovich for excessive force. 2 of them had recommendations for suspension from the review board. All 3 were personally overruled and sealed by Chief Miller. It was the smoking gun, the proof of the cover-up. She downloaded the files onto a small encrypted flash drive. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She slipped the drive into her pocket. It felt as heavy as a brick. That evening, she found Jessica Riley's office address online. She put the flash drive in a plain manila envelope. Inside, she included a single, unsigned typewritten note. The machine has gears. This is one of them. Use it well. She drove to the law firm after dark. The building was closed. She slipped the envelope through the mail slot in the front door. As she drove away, she didn't feel scared anymore. She felt clean. The next morning, Jessica Riley arrived at her office to find the envelope on the floor. She opened it, puzzled by the note. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop. When she saw the files, she gasped. She read through them, her eyes widening. The overruled suspensions, the buried reports, the signature of Chief Robert Miller on every single page. It was a gift from heaven. Or, more accurately, a gift from a courageous soul deep inside the machine. She picked up the phone and called Elias. "Elias," she said, and he could hear the suppressed excitement in her voice, a new, harder edge. "The turning point has arrived. They didn't just give us a case. They gave us the whole damn department." The pre-trial hearing was scheduled. The judge assigned was a woman named Althea Hayes, a former federal prosecutor with a reputation for being tough, fair, and having zero tolerance for police misconduct. The city's lawyers tried to have her recused, claiming bias. The motion was denied. Elias looked at the calendar. He had 9 days of leave remaining. 9 days until he was supposed to be on the road with Anya, watching the ocean roll by. Instead, he was preparing for the fight of his life. But for the first time, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The fortress was beginning to crack. The news of the upcoming hearing spread through the city like wildfire. It was no longer just a story on the back page of the paper. It was the talk of every diner, every barbershop, every church basement. Mr. Henderson's network was buzzing. Flyers printed in the back of his shop began appearing on telephone poles and in community centers. They were simple. A black and white photo of Elias from his military days, in his dress uniform, medals on his chest. Below it, the date, time, and location of the courthouse hearing. At the bottom, a single line: "Dignity is not negotiable." The story took on a life of its own. The local news ran a profile on Elias detailing his 30-year career in the Army Corps of Engineers, his work on infrastructure projects all over the world, his quiet life as a civil servant. They contrasted it with a deep dive into Officer Kovich's record, citing the federal lawsuit's allegation of a pattern of abuse. They couldn't report on the sealed files yet, but the narrative was clear. The image of the vagrant was being replaced by the reality of the decorated veteran and respected engineer. The city's power structure began to feel the heat. Mayor Thompson's office was flooded with calls. The pressure was immense. He called Chief Miller into a private meeting. The mayor, a man whose primary skill was sensing which way the political winds were blowing, was nervous. "Bob, this is getting out of hand," the mayor said, pacing his office. "This man, Thorne, he's not who Kovich said he was." "He assaulted my officer," Miller said, his voice flat and hard. He had staked his reputation on this. To back down now would be to admit weakness, to admit a lie. "The man is litigious and looking for a payday." The union is fully behind us. The union doesn't vote for me, the mayor snapped. The people do. And right now, the people are seeing a hero in one corner and a thug in the other. You need to get this under control. It is under control, Miller assured him, though for the first time a sliver of doubt had entered his mind. The mention of irrefutable video evidence in the lawsuit gnawed at him. What had they seen? The depositions were a brutal affair. They took place in a sterile conference room in a neutral law office. Kovich went first. Coached by the city's top litigator, he stuck to his story. He was calm, professional, and utterly convincing if you didn't know the truth. He repeated the lies from his report, embellishing them with details meant to make him seem like the victim. He claimed Elias had cursed at him, had balled his fists, had been the aggressor at every turn. Jessica Riley's cross-examination was surgical. She didn't raise her voice. She asked a series of calm, precise questions. Officer Kovich, in your report, you state you were responding to a call about vagrancy. Can you provide the time of that call? I don't recall the exact time. Can you provide the name of the complainant? It was an anonymous call. Officer, you state Mr. Thorne matched the description. What was that description? Kovich hesitated. A black male, wearing work clothes. Riley let that hang in the air for a moment. A black male, in a city that is 40% black. That was the entire description? He was acting suspiciously. What, specifically, was suspicious about a man with a clipboard looking at a bridge he was hired by the city to inspect? I didn't know that at the time. Didn't he tell you that, officer? Didn't he tell you he was a city engineer and that his identification was in his truck? No, Kovich lied, his jaw tight. He was belligerent from the start. Riley made a note on her pad and moved on. She was not trying to break him here. She was just locking him into his lies, brick by brick. Next was Elias. The city's lawyer went at him hard, just as Riley had predicted. He brought up his military service, trying to frame it as a source of trauma and aggression. Master Sergeant Thorne, you saw combat in Afghanistan, is that correct? I did. You were involved in incidents where you had to use force? I was a soldier in a war zone, yes. And it's true that you suffer from PTSD as a result of an IED explosion? The lawyer asked, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Elias looked him directly in the eye. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. I do not suffer from it. I manage it with the same discipline I apply to every other aspect of my life. It does not control me. The lawyer tried to paint him as angry, as having a problem with authority, but Elias's composure was unshakable. He answered every question with the same calm, factual precision. He did not get angry. He did not get flustered. He simply stated the truth. He was the most credible witness imaginable. The day before the hearing, Elias and Anya were in their kitchen. The tension was a living thing in the house. Anya was making soup, the rhythmic chop of vegetables a comforting sound. Are you ready for tomorrow? She asked softly. I am, he said. He was sitting at the table, his hands resting near his father's tools. He wasn't cleaning them, just touching them. I'm proud of you, Elias, she said, stopping her work to look at him. No matter what happens tomorrow, I am so proud of you. He felt a surge of emotion, of love and gratitude for this woman who had been his rock for 35 years. He reached out and took her hand. Whatever happens, he said, we face it together. He had one day of his vacation leave remaining. One day. The trip up the coast was a ghost, a dream from another life. Tomorrow was the day of reckoning. Tomorrow, the machine would have to answer for what it had done. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a clear, brilliant blue. Elias stood in front of his closet, choosing his suit. He picked a conservative charcoal gray, a crisp white shirt, and a simple dark blue tie. He dressed with the same meticulous care he had for 30 years of military inspections. Every detail mattered. It was about respect, not for the court, but for himself, for the cause he was representing. When he and Anya drove downtown, they saw it, the people. They were walking in small groups toward the federal courthouse, their faces set with a quiet determination. There were older folks from Mr. Henderson's neighborhood, young families, men and women in Union jackets, and a large contingent of veterans, some in VFW hats, others in crisp old service uniforms. They weren't shouting. They weren't carrying aggressive signs. They were just coming. a silent, powerful river of community solidarity flowing toward the halls of justice. The scene outside the courthouse was extraordinary. Hundreds of people filled the plaza, a diverse cross-section of the city. They stood quietly, holding the simple flyers with Elias's picture. They parted respectfully to let Elias and Anya pass, a sea of nodding heads and soft-spoken words of encouragement. "We're with you, Sergeant. God bless you, Mr. Thorne." Elias felt a lump form in his throat. This was no longer his fight alone. It was theirs. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Every seat was taken. People lined the walls, standing silently. The air was thick with anticipation. At the plaintiff's table sat Elias, Anya right behind him, and Jessica Riley, her files arranged in neat stacks. At the defendant's table sat Officer Kovich, Chief Miller, and a team of 3 city lawyers. Kovich looked pale and defiant. Miller looked impassive, projecting an aura of untouchable authority. He scanned the crowd with a look of faint disdain. Judge Althea Hayes entered. She was a small, stern-looking woman in her 60s, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "All rise," the bailiff called. The sound of hundreds of people rising to their feet was like a gust of wind. Judge Hayes took her seat and surveyed the packed courtroom. "This is a hearing on the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "But given the evidence presented in the briefs and the extraordinary public interest, I am treating this as a full evidentiary hearing. I want to get to the bottom of this. Now." Jessica Riley stood. "Your Honor, we are prepared to present our case." She began by calling Elias Thorne to the stand. In his calm, measured voice, Elias recounted the events of that day. He told the court about his job, his inspection, his polite and repeated attempts to identify himself. He described Kovich's aggression, the unprovoked assault, the fall, the pain. He described the moment Kovich had nudged his broken leg and dismissed it as trash. He spoke for 20 minutes, and in that time, the courtroom was utterly silent. There was no artifice in his testimony. It was the simple, unadorned truth. And it was devastating. The city's lead attorney tried to cross-examine him using the same tactics from the deposition. He tried to bring up PTSD. "Mr. Thorne, isn't it possible that in that moment you felt threatened and your combat training took over?" "My training," Elias said, his voice level, "taught me de-escalation. It taught me discipline. It taught me to assess a threat, not to become one. The only person who escalated the situation that day was Officer Kovich." The lawyer had no answer. He sat down, defeated. Then Riley said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls our next witness, Leo Martinez." Leo walked to the stand, his hands trembling slightly. He looked terrified, but as he passed Elias gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. The boy took a deep breath. "Mr. Martinez," Riley said gently, "were you at the Elm Street Bridge on the morning of September 8th? "Yes, ma'am." "And what were you doing there?" "Filming. For a skate video." "And did you happen to film the interaction between my client, Mr. Thorne, and Officer Kovich?" "Yes, ma'am. I filmed the whole thing." A murmur went through the courtroom. Kovich at the defendant's table went rigid. Chief Miller leaned forward slightly. "Your Honor," Riley said, "we would like to play that video for the court." The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. A large screen descended from the ceiling. For the next 3 minutes, the courtroom watched in stunned silence. They saw it all. The calm engineer, the aggressive cop. The lie of the police report laid bare for everyone to see. The crack of the prosthetic was sickeningly audible. But the most damning moment was the audio of Kovich's voice, clear as a bell in the quiet courtroom. "Looks like you'll be hopping home." A collective gasp went through the gallery. It was a sound of shock and outrage. Anya reached forward and squeezed Elias's shoulder. He did not watch the screen. He watched the jury box, which in this case was just the judge. He watched her face. It was a granite mask of fury. When the lights came up, the atmosphere in the room had changed. It was electric. Kovich was ashen. His lawyer was shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact. Chief Miller stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Officer Kovich," Judge Hayes said, her voice dangerously quiet, "take the stand." Kovich walked to the witness stand like a man walking to the gallows. "Officer," the judge said, leaning forward, "you have sworn an oath to tell the truth. I want you to watch this video again and then I want you to explain to me how it is not a complete and total contradiction of your sworn police report. I want you to explain to me how this is not perjury. She played the last 10 seconds of the video again. The fall, the comment. Kovich stammered. It was a tense situation. The video doesn't show the whole context. The video shows a man complying, Judge Hayes shot back. It shows you assaulting him. It shows you mocking his disability. That is the context I see. Do you have a different one? Kovich was unraveling. He was resisting. I felt threatened. It was then that Jessica Riley stood up. Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence. It was delivered to my office anonymously, but we have since verified its authenticity with the metadata. It is Officer Kovich's complete unredacted personnel file. She placed a thick binder on the clerk's desk. It shows 3 prior investigations for excessive force, all with similar fact patterns. It shows 2 recommendations for suspension. And it shows that every single one of these investigations was personally quashed and sealed by one man, Chief Robert Miller. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hayes banged her gavel. Order! Order! She looked at the file, then at Chief Miller. Her eyes were burning coals. Chief Miller, you will be placed under oath, and you will explain this. Now, the chief, his face purple with rage and humiliation, refused to testify, citing his Fifth Amendment rights. It was over. The fortress had not just been breached, it had been demolished. A man in a dark suit stood up in the front row of the gallery. Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Frank Dixon. May I approach the bench? Judge Hayes nodded. Dixon walked to the bench and spoke in a low voice, but his final words were loud enough for the whole court to hear. Your Honor, based on the evidence presented here today, the United States government will be opening a full pattern of practice investigation into this city's police department. Furthermore, we will be seeking a federal grand jury indictment against Officer Dale Kovich for criminal civil rights violations and perjury, and against Chief Robert Miller for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. Then he turned to 2 federal marshals standing by the door. He nodded. The marshals approached the defendant's table. Kovich stood up, his face a mask of disbelief. You can't do this, he stammered. Dale Kovich, you are under arrest, one of the marshals said. He turned Kovich around and handcuffed him, the click of the metal echoing in the silent courtroom. They walked him toward the exit. As they passed the bar, the second marshal stopped him. We have to remove your belt and shoelaces. Standard procedure. Elias watched as the officer who had humiliated him was subjected to the same small, dehumanizing rituals of the arrest process. He watched as Kovich, the man of power, was rendered powerless. There was no triumph in Elias's heart, not joy. Just a profound, quiet sense of a balance being restored, an equation being solved. The irony was stark, and it was complete. The machine had consumed its own. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Kovich and Miller's arrest were the lead story on every national news network. The federal investigation into the police department became a seismic event, shaking the city's foundations. Mayor Thompson, politically radioactive, announced he would not seek re-election. Within 6 months, under a consent decree with the Department of Justice, the city was forced to completely overhaul its police department. A new, civilian-led oversight board with real subpoena power was established. Use of force policies were rewritten. A new chief, a reformer from outside the state, was brought in with a mandate for change. Dale Kovich was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Robert Miller, in a deal to avoid a longer sentence, pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and served 18 months. He was stripped of his pension. The city settled Elias's civil suit for an amount that was not disclosed, but which was rumored to be historic. Part of the settlement was non-monetary. The city formally apologized to Elias Thorne, and the Elm Street Bridge was officially renamed the Master Sergeant Elias Thorne Integrity Bridge. 3 months after the hearing, on a bright, cool Saturday morning in December, Elias stood on that bridge. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. He had a new leg. It was a step above his old one, a state-of-the-art prosthetic paid for by the settlement. It was lighter, more responsive. He barely felt it. He leaned against the railing, the same railing Kovich had stood by, and looked down into the ravine. The grass was brown with winter, but the space was peaceful. He ran his hand over the cold metal of the new plaque that bore his name. Anya came and stood beside him, slipping her hand into his. They didn't speak for a long time. "It's a good bridge," he said finally, his voice quiet. "You build good bridges," she replied. He thought about the 21 days of leave he had lost, the vacation that never happened. He had spent them fighting a machine, and in the end, he had done what he always did. He had found the structural flaws. He had analyzed the stress points, and he had worked methodically and with unshakable discipline to reinforce the foundation, not just of a bridge, but of his city. He looked out at the skyline, at the buildings and roads he had spent a lifetime helping to create. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, deep and profound. It wasn't the peace of victory. It was the peace of a job well done, the peace of a promise kept. He squeezed Anya's hand. The light was changing, the morning sun giving way to the full light of day. It was a good day, a day for building things. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.